Hey there, greetings to all of you. This is a video blog post. Some of you just checking into my blog for the first time this week to follow along on some of the family stuff. I do about half of the post as written posts and about half of them as video posts. So today's scripture passage is Ephesians 5, 21 through 33. And again, we're reflecting on family. And so I'd really encourage you to read the passage. Again, like the Genesis 2 passage, it is one of the really clear and powerful passages on marriage in the scriptures. Now, yesterday when I was talking about Genesis, I made this point. I think when the Bible talks about marriage, there's sort of this dance back and forth between describing marriage as a full-on partnership where you stand shoulder to shoulder as husband and wife to tackle the things God has set in front of you. And at the same time, the Bible also, when it teaches on marriage, talks about some difference in some roles. Now, you notice in this passage, you see that those same two themes. Here's the partnership side of it. Verse 21 starts out with these words, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Now, what that means in the context of marriage, and then it launches into a description on marriage first and then later on some other family stuff. What that means in the context of marriage is this. When I think of the word submit here, what it means is that when I submit to Diane and when she submits to me, we seek the good of the other person ahead of our own. So in a healthy marriage, there's a full-on partnership in that we are both submitted to each other. Each of us prefers the other person to ourselves. But then Paul's specific about some role differences. He says to wives, this is controversial language for some people, he says, wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord. And then he goes on and he says that husbands are the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church. Now the biblical principle there is just simply this. Part of God's design for marriage is that God asks the husband to be the spiritual head of the home, the leader of the home, asks the wife to lovingly follow and submit to that leadership. Now, lots of abuse and misinterpretation of this, but simply what it means, at least in my mind, is this. I recognize that God has given me, in our home, God has given me more responsibility at the end of the day for the spiritual life and the health and well-being of our marriage and our kids than he has to Diane. I will have larger questions to answer at the end of my life than Diane will. Now, we work on that in partnership, but God calls me to lead. God calls Diane in a loving way to follow. Now, part of the way that this gets abused is some men hear that they're the head of their family. They think it means that they can be a tyrant and a dictator. Well, Paul deals with that here. He says, wives, submit to your husbands out of reverence for Christ. And then he gives the husband a tougher job. He says, husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Christ's leadership of the church was first displayed in that he laid down his life for us. So to be a leader in my home means, yes, that I provide leadership, but it's servant leadership, it's loving leadership. Jesus calls me to be willing to die for Diane. And so again, there's some role differentiation there, and I think that role differentiation is important, but it happens in the context of a partnership. Part of what's striking to me about what Paul gets after here is this. Paul challenges what I think of as core sins for both men and women in marriage. The core sin for men, honestly, and I can feel it in myself, is that we have a tendency to be passive in marriage, particularly around spiritual issues, say, it's women's work. The core sin, I think, for females is the opposite. It's the tendency to grasp a leadership role that God hasn't given to them. And interestingly, we see this back in the Garden of Eden. When Adam and Eve fall into sin, here's what happened. Adam stands by and watches Eve as she gives into the temptation of Satan. Satan works on Eve. She says, this is a great idea. She takes and eats and she gives to Adam. Adam stands by passively. And so Paul really challenges that in us and asks us to push past what's our core sin to live a life of obedience. So again, the dance is full-on shoulder-to-shoulder partnership, equal partners in all of this, some distinction in role. And so I just encourage you to think about your own, if you're married, plan to be married someday, think about how you're functioning in those two things as well. Are you functioning as full partners? And are you also living out of the roles that God has given to you? Guys, I just want to say to you, a word to you in particular, because I'm a guy. Are you being the kind of godly servant, loving, sacrificial leader your wife and your family needs? We'll be back tomorrow with some more thoughts on family. Blessings to you and have a great day.